The man who came closest to stopping World War II wasn't a spy, wasn't a foreign enemy, wasn't some underground rebel hiding in a basement. He was Hitler's own chief of the German General Staff. He wore the uniform. He held the power. He saw the entire catastrophe coming years before it happened, wrote it all down in black and white, handed it directly to the men who could have stopped it. And they ignored every single word. So he did something that inside Nazi Germany was arguably more dangerous than pulling a trigger on a battlefield. He walked away. He resigned. He said no, loudly, clearly on record, when every single man around him was nodding yes. And what happened to him in the final hours of his life is one of the most brutal, most heartbreaking endings in the entire history of the Second World War. Before we go any further, if you're new to Timeless World, you need to subscribe right now and hit that bell. We don't do surface-level history here. We go into the rooms. We sit with the people. We tell you what actually happened, not the cleaned-up version. This is one of those stories. Don't walk away from it. June 29, 1880. A boy is born in Biebrich, a quiet town on the banks of the Rhine River. His father is an industrialist, disciplined, principled. The kind of man who raised his son to believe that your word meant something. That honor wasn't a concept, it was a daily decision. The boy's name was Ludwig August Theodor Beck. He was quiet as a child, serious. The kind of kid who read when other boys wrestled, who listened when others talked. Teachers noticed it. Later, commanding officers would notice it too. In 1898, he enlisted in the Imperial German Army. Over the next 15 years, he moved steadily through staff schools, military postings, and border regiments. He wasn't flashy. He didn't chase medals or headlines. He studied, he absorbed, he thought deeply about war, not just how to fight it, but what it actually costs. Then August 1914 arrived and the world split open. Beck served throughout World War I on the Western Front, watching Germany's early confidence slowly bleed out across 4 years of mud, barbed wire, and industrial-scale death. By November 1918, it was over. Germany surrendered. The empire collapsed. Millions of young men were in the ground. For Beck, the defeat wasn't just military. It felt personal, shameful. Like most officers of his generation, he believed Germany had been betrayed from within. By politicians, by revolution, by a government that signed away everything at Versailles without the army truly being broken in the field. The Treaty of Versailles cut the German army to 100,000 men, abolished the general staff, banned conscription. The greatest military machine in Europe reduced to a glorified police force, monitored and humiliated by the countries that had beaten them. Beck stayed in the army, and in those quiet years of the Weimar Republic, he did something unusual for a soldier. He became a scholar of war. He wrote doctrine. He studied strategy at a level most officers never attempt. In 1931, he helped publish the official German Army Operations Manual, a document so advanced in its thinking on mobile warfare that later versions reportedly remained in use for decades. He wasn't just a general, he was the military's intellectual conscience. Consciences, in political madness, always end up paying a price. January 1933, Adolf Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany. Here's the part that makes this story complicated. And complicated is where real history lives. Beck was not horrified, he was relieved. He wrote in his own hand, "I have wished for years for the political revolution, and now my wishes have come true." Let that sink in. The man who would eventually die trying to kill Hitler once celebrated his rise with genuine hope. Not because Beck believed in Nazi ideology, he had no interest in the racial theories, the party pageantry, the propaganda circus. He cared nothing for any of that. But he was a German nationalist who had watched his country get humiliated for 15 years. And Hitler, in those early days, looked like the answer. Rearmament, expansion, Germany walking tall again on the world stage. Beck wasn't alone in this thinking. Millions of intelligent, educated Germans made the same calculation in 1933. That fact doesn't excuse it. But erasing it doesn't help us understand how monsters rise as true. They don't rise through fear alone. They rise through hope, through need, through the desperate desire to believe someone has the answer. In 1935, when Hitler openly re-established the General Staff in open defiance of Versailles, Beck became its first chief. He was at the absolute peak of German military power. And that's when he started to see what was actually coming. Hitler's next move: invade Czechoslovakia, seize the Sudetenland, absorb Bohemia, dare Britain and France to respond. Beck sits at his desk and runs the real numbers, not the propaganda numbers, the actual strategic picture. He concludes, with cold, clear, unshakable certainty, that Germany is marching toward catastrophe. He writes memo after memo, pages of precise, devastating military logic. He argues that Britain and France will not accept another bloodless humiliation. that Germany's military, despite its rapid rebuilding, is nowhere near ready for a full-scale multi-front war against the major European powers, that Hitler's strategy of endless aggressive bluffing will eventually be called, and Germany will have nothing left to play. He pushes for something that had never been done inside Nazi Germany, a unified stand by the senior generals, every top commander walking into Hitler's office together, presenting a collective refusal. Beck's logic. Hitler cannot arrest them all at once. The weight of unified military opposition might actually force a pause. He reaches out personally. He pleads. He argues behind closed doors with men he has known for decades. Not one of them moves. Some are true believers. Some are protecting their careers. Some are simply terrified. And in 1938, inside the Third Reich, terror was entirely rational. Defying Hitler wasn't a setback. It was a slow, agonizing death. Beck stands alone. On August 18, 1938, he submits his resignation as chief of the German General Staff. He becomes the first senior military officer in the entire Third Reich to break from the Nazi regime on moral grounds. Not out of personal grievance, not from a power struggle, but because he flatly refused, to put his name on a catastrophe he could see coming. Hitler accepted the resignation, then buried the news completely. The last thing he wanted was for the German public to know that his own top general thought the whole campaign was suicidal. Beck disappears from public life, but he doesn't go quiet. In private, he stays connected to a growing network. Officers, lawyers, diplomats, politicians, all of them watching Germany's victories pile up, all of them waiting for the moment the tide finally turns. September 1939, Poland falls in weeks. May 1940, France collapses in days. The Nazi war machine looks unstoppable. The doubters go quiet, temporarily. Then June 1941, Hitler invades the Soviet Union. Beck had warned against exactly this. A land war of incomprehensible scale against a country with almost limitless manpower and territory. February 1943, Stalingrad. The German Sixth Army, 300,000 men, surrenders. The single greatest military defeat in German history. Beck watches it all from the outside and knows. The math has finally caught up. By 1943, the conspiracy to assassinate Hitler is no longer whispers in back rooms. It's real, organized, and running out of time. And the conspirators choose Beck as the man who will lead the provisional government after Hitler is dead, the one who will negotiate peace with the Allies and pull Germany back from total annihilation before there's nothing left to save. The Wolfslayer, East Prussia, July 20th, 1944. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg walks into Hitler's daily military briefing carrying a leather briefcase. Inside, a British-made bomb, armed and ready. He slides it under the heavy oak conference table, as close to Hitler as he can manage. Then he excuses himself, steps outside, and waits. 12:42 p.m. The bomb detonates. The explosion rips through the room. Windows explode outward. Men are thrown across the floor. 4 people will die from their injuries. Adolf Hitler walks out of the smoke. A heavy table leg had deflected the blast. Hitler suffered a burst eardrum, minor burns, a bruised arm. In Berlin at military headquarters, Beck and the other conspirators had already begun mobilizing, issuing orders, activating units, preparing to announce the death of the Führer. Then the phone rang, Hitler's voice, very much alive, very much in control. Within hours, the entire operation collapsed. General Friedrich Fromm, a conspirator who had kept 1 foot out the door, moved instantly to protect himself, arresting the very men he had plotted with. Beck was taken. He was 64 years old. He had given his entire adult life to Germany. He had resigned the highest military post in the Reich rather than be part of a catastrophe. He had risked everything and failed. He knew what was waiting for him: the Gestapo cells, the People's Court. Judge Roland Freisler, who screamed defendants into submission before sentencing them to death by slow strangulation. Hung on piano wire, executions filmed for Hitler's private viewing. Beck made one request. He asked to keep his service pistol. It was granted. Shortly after midnight on July 21, 1944, Ludwig Beck raised his pistol to his temple. He fired. He was still alive. The wound was catastrophic. Skull fractured, blood everywhere, but he was still breathing. His hand had trembled at the final moment. He lay on the floor, semi-conscious, barely holding on. A sergeant stepped forward, pressed his weapon to the back of Beck's neck, and fired. Ludwig Beck died on the floor of the same building where he had tried to save Germany from itself. No trial, no formal sentence, no final words recorded for history. But the humiliation wasn't finished. His body was quietly buried at St. Matthew's Cemetery in Berlin. Then the SS returned. They dug up the grave, transported the remains to a crematorium, incinerated them, and then scattered his ashes, deliberately, across the city's sewage fields. No grave, no marker, no place where anyone could ever stand and say, Here lies a man who tried. They wanted him erased. They underestimated what erasure does to a story. In 1956, the West German government renamed a military academy in his honor. Today, Ludwig Beck is remembered across Germany as the general who said no, the one man at the highest level of military power who saw the catastrophe clearly, put it in writing, handed it to the people who could have acted, and when they refused, walked away from everything rather than be part of it. He wasn't perfect. He once welcomed the monster he later died fighting. That contradiction isn't a footnote. That is the story. Because the real question this story forces you to ask isn't about Beck. It's about the others, the generals who knew, who saw the same memos, who ran the same numbers and nodded anyway. How many catastrophes in history, in any era, came down to that exact moment? The moment when enough people who knew better decided that staying silent was safer than standing up? Beck stood up, alone, too late for it to work. But he stood. If this story hit you the way it hit me, subscribe to Timeless World right now. We tell the stories that textbooks reduce to a single sentence but deserve to be fully lived. Hit the like button. It takes 1 second and it directly helps us keep making content like this. And drop your answer in the comments. Do you believe the July 20th plot could have actually succeeded if Beck's fellow generals had stood with him back in 1938, 6 years earlier, when it still could have changed everything? I read every single comment, everyone. Timeless World, history that actually matters.